futuro. A voi la parola.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, you can talk. You're live now.
Are you there?
Very good. So, I'm live. Okay, very good. Is Alessandro Damiani with us?
Here I am. Hi. Hi, Jean-Eric. Nice to have you with us.
Alessandro, is that you?
That's me. That is me. Jean-Eric, you and I go back about not quite 30 years, but almost.
25?
The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, Alessandro, I don't think I should say too much by way of introduction. I know that these digital formats are not so easy. I mean, not so easy to do, I can tell you. I'm now here standing in front of my screen, a gray screen, speaking to, I hope, several of you in Italy and maybe beyond, and not so easy for you to listen to. So I will be quite brief at the outset. What I would be quite interested is to start a conversation, Alessandro, with you and then with participants. But what I think I should underline at the outset is firstly that research and innovation has been and is critical, obviously, in the context of the response to the pandemic. You will have seen that Horizon 2020, a number of other instruments as well, were available already back in January. So even before this was declared a pandemic, we already asked research teams across Europe to come forward with proposals for therapies, tests, even vaccines. And we had a rather remarkable response, and we continued then engaging with the science world in Europe to ramp up solutions to fight the pandemic, including a lot of work now ongoing to look at the social and economic impacts of the way Europe has been confronting the COVID-19 pandemic. There's of course also a lot of investment ongoing, including beyond research budgets, on preparing the ground for vaccine delivery, which is obviously one of the most promising avenues for our societies to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, what is, I think, also very much debated, and I think, and I hope also in Italy and certainly in APRE this will be the case, is in how far will our societies, our government administrations, and our scientists be essential in building better societies after the crisis. You know that at European Union level, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, so the bulk of Europe's contribution to dealing with the consequence of the economic and social. I hear a lot of noise, a lot of people coming into the discussion. Well, thank you. The Recovery and Resilience Facility, so Europe's contribution to investment in building back better societies and economy, will also open up the possibility for investing into research and innovation, particularly the research and innovation, which then allows Europe to continue to progress on its green digital transformation. Because the challenge right now is that at national level, at EU level, we continue to invest in our future, to build back by dealing with our green and digital transformation. I think there is a little sense to now invest massively into our recovery by building back to the way we were working. So I think the challenge now is to invest for the benefit of resilient societies, but also by investing into much easier said than done. It will require a lot of experimentation in society. It will require a lot of knowledge. And it probably requires also that the technologies which are identified in energy, in mobility, in waste management, in more sustainable agriculture, that these technologies are also deployed much faster. That's more than research and innovation. That's really the step after research and innovation. And that is very much also what we hope to see happen around the Horizon Europe missions. So, Alessandro, that's the background. And in that context, what you might want to discuss is where we stand with the preparation of Horizon Europe, where we see member states really being ambitious in coming together in the European research area to provide answers to these recovery, resilience, green and digital challenges. And I'd be happy to explain in more detail how the Commission plans to be supportive, sometimes decisive, in bringing this forward. Voilà, Alessandro, back to you.
Thank you, Jean-Éric. I would like to start with a question on why is it, from your point of view, that there is such a huge expectation in Europe and in Italy? In Italy, well, we have a proof of that today with more than 2,600 people registered for this conference. So okay. Great expectations, great interest for research policy at European level, great expectations vis-a-vis the coming framework program Horizon Europe. Maybe you would like to tell us in a few words, what do you think is the salient elements of this new program and why these expectations are justified and how they will be satisfied?
Well, Alessandro, I think that, first of all, I'm delighted that so many of you have joined this discussion this afternoon. That is indeed a very remarkable mobilization. I think, of course, digital formats have opened up in many places, many areas, the possibility for much broader and richer conversation when events are being organized, and that's really very welcome. But I think this is not just because it's a digital webinar that it's many of you interested. I think it does indeed reflect the fact that the preparations of Horizon Europe as far as the European programs are concerned, but I would hope that, or argue that this is also to an extent the case at national level, including in Italy. It's a discussion which tries to connect research organizations, scientists themselves, and their projects together with these transformations, the green, digital one, and the recovery, which we are trying to connect. Horizon Europe is very much, of course, also about showing to the world that the best science is in Europe. That's the European Research Council, which is funding Nobel Prize winners every year, and which is attracting outstanding ideas, disruptive science, including attracting scientists back or scientists to Europe, really a beacon of science excellence. And alongside Marie Skłodowska-Curie and our support to infrastructure, that's a science pillar which, again, really allows and demonstrates that great and in many cases the best science is taking place in Europe. And along similar lines, but I'm sure we'll come back to that, in the pillar on innovation with the Institute of Technology in Budapest, but also and now with the new European Innovation Council, we are increasingly also becoming relevant in innovation. This is not completely visible yet in Italy, Alessandro, I must say, but if you look across all member states at EU level, we are creating every year more startups than the United States. So innovation in itself is at home here in Europe. What now needs to happen is that, that this innovation also has an ecosystem at EU level to grow and grow fast, and then ideally also continue to create value in Europe, and not, as is often the case today, is bought up or moves outside the continent. But beyond these two key pillars, I think what is happening to explain this very large interest and great mobilization is the fact that the core of Horizon Europe, the famous pillar on societal challenges and industrial competitiveness, is really about providing knowledge, providing solutions, technology, but also social experimentation to ensure that we have better, more impactful change in society, better public policies, but also better outcomes for our economies. And this is across a limited number of areas which are central to the public debate everywhere in Europe. Health, of course, societal challenge in the sense of democracy, governance, rule of law, but also security. And then the very classical key challenges on climate, energy, transport, the environment, agriculture, and more general, of course, the digital challenges which are pervasive to everything happening in Europe. And so what we have, I think, successfully done in the last year and a half, together with APRE and many other partners in the European Union, is to engage a dialogue, and not just to discuss, but effectively to co-design, co-create, co-design the priorities of Horizon Europe. Now, exactly a month ago, we held in Brussels, and you attended, the Research and Innovation Days, the second edition after last year. And we had more than 35,000 people which registered and actively participated in these 3 days. And that is, as is the case for the event this afternoon, a demonstration that there is a lot of interest, not just to get my topic on the list of the work program, but to engage, to have a much more meaningful conversation on what type of research is it that Europe needs, where should it take place, how can it be promoted, who wants to be part of it, and how do we pick up the outcome, the knowledge and the solutions from that research to make a difference in society. That's what we're trying to do. And I very much expect that across Horizon Europe, in collaborative research, partnerships and missions, and then of course in the European Innovation Council and European Research Council, we can really make a difference on the ground. And if you want, Alessandro, I'd be happy to give a few examples.
You've hinted to the relation between research and policy, the big policy objectives, the political objectives of the Union. There is a strong emphasis, it seems to me, in this new program that is being finalized on research for policy. Of course, this is not entirely new, it's enshrined in the treaties, but there is a new strong emphasis both in the future legislation, in the strategic plan being finalized, and one can expect in the future work programs. I think this is very good. This is very promising. Certainly from the point of view of making research more pertinent, more relevant, and possibly more prominent on the political agenda. But I wonder, and I would like to ask you, is there also a risk that focalizing so much on the relative short term, the next 5 years, the next 7 years of the political cycle, that one neglects the longer term? Do you see a risk there? And if there is one, how do we circumvent it?
Yeah. No, Sandro, that is of course a dilemma, apparent to an extent, but real also, with which we need to work, and we need to provide indeed the right approach. I mean, I probably would instinctively say a balanced approach, but it's not so much an issue of balance. Huh? It's an issue of really making a well thought through, well based choices between indeed shorter term applied research with more immediate outcomes in society, with longer term research, very much needed also, because we are not just dealing with the next 10 years, we are dealing probably, as we are trying to also get us closer to being a climate neutral continent, getting us to 2050. And for that, I think some solutions are not yet identified, and certainly the science needed to deploy them is not yet carried out. And here, I would like to distinguish a little bit between this traditional discussion between applied research and blue sky research or fundamental research. I mean, of course, it's often distinct, including distinct in the way this is funded and supported at EU level or across member states. And I think it is obvious for anyone in this meeting today and anyone in the Commission that Europe needs to invest very strongly and much more, I think, than it does today in fundamental research and in fundamental breakthrough science. Without the interdisciplinary basic science knowledge, there's going to be no breakthroughs in applied research, at least not of a magnitude of those which we will need in the future. So that's, and there are, of course, tens of examples of basic science or blue sky research, which leads then also in itself to very remarkable applications. I mean, graphene is one example which is used all the time, but there are many more. So that's clear. What I would say here is that, of course, the answer is not only, and probably not even particularly, in European programs. This is a responsibility largely of member states, and I never waste an opportunity to tell my counterparts across the 27 member states that they need to invest more in basic research, more and better, which is also very much a discussion on how the landscape is set up, sometimes in need of reforms, how careers of researchers are contemplated, how much public resources are put into that. All that is essentially a national effort and a national responsibility, and all member states need to do more and need to do better. That is absolutely key, and of course we contribute with the European Research Council to make this even more visible, a little bit of a Champions League type effect on the national system, so lifting them up, if you want, through the European Research Council. Obviously also hopefully making a real difference with the science which is supported there. We also help with our support to have access to infrastructure. We try to help with the mobility of researchers, which can be very precious for a national system. And then, as you certainly know, Alessandro, there's also a funding which exists to accompany analytically reform considerations or reform efforts in member states. So this investment in science is very, very important, and we are, of course, very much pushing it with our own means or supporting member states to do so. But there's a second level in your question, which is across the traditional research and the consortia-driven research, but also the industrial or member state partnerships. How do you find the right balance between promoting research where you can expect outcomes in the policy cycle which is relevant, the 5 or 7 years which you mentioned? I think we should not be shy in doing that. And the fact that we are preparing Horizon Europe with everyone in the Commission really allows us to explore where policy frameworks, be it new regulation, giving innovation signals, be it policy choices which were agreed, the 2030 CO2 reduction, the Commission now proposes to increase it from 40 to 55%. That's massive, and that will require action and outcomes now in the next few years. So this is absolutely part of the Horizon Europe priority setting and the ongoing discussions. But, and I must say, this is something we are fully aware of, you also need to have this type of applied research looking beyond 27 or 2030, because we also need to kick off today the research which will lead to technologies to be then deployed in the 30s and maybe even beyond. And I can take here the example of the aeronautic industry. We have a partnership which is being discussed. Clean Sky 1 and 2 are the ones which were running, and we are now looking at clean aviation. The next iteration to support the aeronautics industry. And here the discussion has been exactly the one you described. What do we do in this partnership? Do we do optimization of aircraft to reduce the impact, to increase even further the efficiency of today's planes, highly relevant in view of the 2030 objective? Or do we focus the limited resources on getting the new airplane or the range of airplanes which will allow full decarbonization by 2050? And it's not necessarily possible or easy to reconcile. So these are types of discussions which are taking place across the entire program, which are very much needed. And what is needed is not just that we discuss it in the Commission, is that we discuss it with you, that we discuss it with scientists, which have their own expectations, but also with policymakers, with citizens and society, which is absolutely key to guide then the fine-tuning of the balance and the choices made.
Jean-Eric, you've talked about investments.
I leave it to you.
You've talked about investments. If we look at the whole picture, the total figure that is now on the table of negotiation is almost 81 billion, plus 5 from the Next Generation EU program. This is quite lower compared to what the Commission was proposing. The program remains very ambitious. The money is likely to go down considerably. We may still hope that the Parliament will retrieve some of those resources. I don't want to embarrass you by asking whether you hope that. Maybe I wouldn't. But I would like to ask you, how likely are we to get extra money from the effort in this negotiation? And second, if we don't, is this program too ambitious for the money it will have?
Well, I think maybe, hope dies last in any case. So yes, I will always be hopeful for, as the process between Parliament and Council is still ongoing, that we can continue to improve the program, possibly including for the budget, which will be allocated to the program. It will not go down further. That's, I think, clear. Leaders have agreed their vision of the future European budget. And there is now indeed a very important discussion between Parliament and Council, including discussed by leaders last week, where the Parliament is making the case for much more effort in the MFF for many programs which they see as of the highest EU added value and key for Europe's investment into its future. And usually prioritized are programs like Erasmus or Horizon Europe. So yes, for the Parliament, I think it is very visible that these are real priorities. Now, how likely is it that this translates into a better overall EU budget and with it a better envelope for Horizon Europe is very, very difficult to say today. But I don't think I should really look into a crystal ball on that. What we are doing is to support the discussion between Council and Parliament, including on that. Now, maybe you will remember the formula of the Commissioner when Horizon Europe was proposed, and Maria Gabriel said it not very differently when she became Commissioner. And the formula was when we had proposed, the ballpark figure of 100 billion. In fact, it was 94 billion. 100 was also Euratom and financial instruments. But when we had proposed that, The question to the Commissioner then was, are you happy with the budget, or would you have preferred, as the Lamy Group suggested, 120 or even 160 billion euros? And the answer was, yes, obviously, I think we could well justify a budget of 120, even 160 billion euros. You just need to look at the very excellent proposals which come everywhere in the program, which we don't pick up for lack of budget. So I think we would make an extremely positive contribution and probably also a difference with a much bigger budget. But then the Commissioner added, but asked me if I'm happy with the budget which was proposed, the 100. And the answer is yes, I am. Because in these circumstances, including the one where you am, because in these circumstances, we have 27 member states now contributing to the EU budget. This was a very ambitious proposal. Now, I don't want to completely transfer it now to the analysis of today's budget. We regret, the Commission regrets the cut which leaders decided on Horizon Europe, including the cut which leaders decided on Next Generation EU meant for Horizon Europe. So the top-up is smaller than we had proposed, by very significantly smaller than we had proposed. So yes, we regret it. I would argue that if the Parliament can improve it, that would be very welcome. If that does not materialize, I would argue that we have a powerful program, a very powerful program, and one which ambition, I think, is in line with the immediate resources. Why do I say that? Because the reality of the impact of Horizon Europe is not Horizon Europe. The reality of its impact is how Horizon Europe will structure, align, and impact on the national efforts. Don't forget that Horizon Europe is about 10%, a bit less, of public funding expected in Europe over the same period. So whether we are 9.2 or 9.8%, what we need to do with Horizon Europe is to make a real difference, provide added value. And one of the main added values we can provide is to structure also the national effort, notably around the very many ambitious partnerships which are now in discussion with member states. And then on the other hand, it is, I think, also very important to underline that Horizon Europe is not happening in isolation. We are connecting it much better than in the past with regional policy instruments and investments done by regional policy. You will see a much closer articulation and therefore much more synergies. The same goes for financial instruments, and the same goes for many other parts of the MFF. In reality, when you look at air transport or energy, what matters is, of course, Horizon Europe and the difference it can make now. But what matters equally in terms of outcome of that research is that it is then being picked up at higher TRL levels or even beyond by instruments like the Connecting Europe facility. So it's in this broader context where I think we will have a lot of impact. But then, again, what is now important is that we get the priorities right, which is why we spend so much effort, time, and resources in reaching out across Europe, reaching out to industry, reaching out to public administrations and to citizens in the context of the missions to ensure that the priorities with that budget can really make the difference.
Thank you very much, Jean-Eric. I am told that my time is up. I hope you still have a few minutes because there is great expectation for the next step, a dialogue with the young. Thank you again.
Let's do that.
It's been nice having you with us.
The new European Research Area, working together to make Europe a lighthouse of excellence for research and innovation, to deliver a green, digital and healthy future and well-being for Europe, to prioritize investments in research and innovation, to use the power of science and innovation to support Europe's recovery and provide a balance between society, individual and the planet. You will be able to access the best universities and research institutions, do research in excellent facilities and ecosystems, establish partnership between research community, business, industry, society and all partners to turn ideas into new products and jobs and make a change, develop new skills and have an attractive career, share knowledge, science data and results and promote trust of citizens. The new European research area will be the place to promote common European values and academic freedom, spread excellence across Europe, encourage gender equality, boost competitiveness and leadership in the world, attract young talents, and do science together. The new European research area is for you.
Okay, here I am. So thank you again to have accepted to participate in this second session. I would say should be different from the previous one. We want to do a different game. This time we are not going to ask you to speak to the community, the RNA community. You and us are very much used to speak with them. But certainly for us, but maybe even for you as Commission, becomes much more difficult when we start to speak with the young generation or the civil society. We took seriously your recommendation, your request as a Commission to approach Horizon Europe in a different way, to bring civil society part of the game. So, and now we start this exercise. A few times ago, I signed an agreement with the director of Agenzia Nazionale per i Giovani, is the National Agency for Young, to launch a program for 2 years to work with a group of young students or people from different ages to work on Horizon Europe. So from our side, we would like to ask them to listen from us what is Horizon Europe and what's doing Horizon Europe in the future. But vice versa, we want to learn from them how to tell this history with the right narrative to be catching and sexy with a young generation and with their relatives. So there is a group of people that now is listening to you, and I would like to ask you to do this game. First, we decide to start from mission, but please try to tell and to convince people about mission, why it's so relevant, the efforts from Commission in promoting this concept of mission. But please think that in front of you there are people that are not interested to get the money from the Commission these times. They are interested to do what the Commission is doing for their future. At the end of your contribution, I would welcome if we can pick up some question directly from this group of young. Thanks a lot. The floor is yours, Jean-Luc.
Hey, Marco, thanks. Okay, I will do it. I will try to do it very briefly, because I would indeed be quite interested to then hear a few comments or questions, not just questions, your comments as well. There is, for me, an absolute must in policy in policy making. Whether you are doing a policy in Italy, in your city or in your region or at national level, or when we are trying to do it at European level, is to ensure that the policies which we devise, they do two things. Firstly, they are devised in a very open way, in interaction with the actors which are interested, so citizens to begin with, civil society association, as we call them generically, so people which are working in cities, which are working on climate change, and which in our societies are really those actors which are on a daily basis making a difference and speaking to you, the younger generation. So how do you better do policy in that context? So that's one real sometimes headache. It's not easy to do, and frankly, doing it from Brussels is honestly even more difficult. And then secondly, it's also to provide a little bit of, I mean, maybe not a European dream. I don't think as a bureaucrat I can provide you with a European dream, but the Commission and the European commissioners, our ministers, are very keen to identify a few areas, what we call the missions, the Horizon Europe missions, which would give you a sense of a very concrete outcome which makes a difference for your future, of course, for the future of our societies, but particularly for the young generations. And what is inspiring us is Kennedy. I don't know how relevant Jack Kennedy is still for you, but we are much inspired by the famous moonshot mission, where Kennedy decided to send a man on the moon. And when engineers told him this is impossible, he said, well, that's why we will do it. And so the NASA mission, I think, is very famous for really lifting up America, its research capacity, but that's not what is important, but lifting up the country in that amazing challenge, bringing a man on the moon. So now we are 40, 50 years later. So the question is not so much the man on the moon, even if, as you certainly all know, we are struggling to bring women and men on the moon again right now. It's not so easy. So we were, when we were preparing the future and the future activities for this commission and the governments which are in place in Europe, we were looking for areas which are really those where your generation, honestly mine as well, sees that we need to make a difference for the future. And we identified 5 areas which I think are those which will allow us as societies to really construct a better future. So the first one is cancer. Cancer is also for young people, unfortunately. Cancer is across all generations. Cancer is happening at any moment and everywhere in Europe. And we can, and the science would allow us to do much better in terms of cancer. And so we have set up a cancer mission. And Walter Ricciardi, or Ricciardi, I think you pronounce it, Walter's name, is, I think, quite known in Italy. He coordinated the COVID-19 response in Italy. And Walter was also helping us to decide what we want to do. And we decided that by 2030, there should be 3 million less deaths from cancer. So that's what we will propose to citizens and to Europeans, and then organize ourselves to achieve that. We also looked at cities. Most of us live in cities or will live in cities. Europe has great cities already today. And we have now a mission where we will collectively find 100 cities which will want to become climate neutral, so no CO2 emissions or mitigated by 2030. So that's another set of missions where the idea is not just to say, let's do that by 2030, but to then identify all the solutions, including the research, needed to achieve that. We also have a mission on climate adaptation. I mean, this summer has, as was the case now nearly every year in the last decade, has had extreme events, most recently in the north of Italy and in France in the Alps, absolutely terrible weather events, but we had similar events absolutely every year. And we now need to ensure that in Italy, everywhere in Europe, you also have solutions which are created, restoring nature, rivers to be adapted to climate change. Of course, we need to fight climate change to begin with, but we also need solutions to ensure that our regions are adapted to deal with the changing climate, be it on water, on extreme weather events, and the like. We also have 2 other missions which are a bit different. One on oceans. You are living on the sea in Italy, and the water is more and more polluted, including by plastic. And we have this oceans mission, which wants to see European shores plastic-free and clean by 2030. And lastly, and this one is maybe a little bit more technical, but very important, is to look at the health of the soils in Europe, in agriculture. Our soils are often more and more sterile, often polluted, and for reasons linked to human activity and to climate change. And this mission is about restoring 70% of our soils that they become healthy soils. And with healthy soils, you have healthy food. So the objective of the mission is to have healthy soils and healthy life. So these are 5 very different areas, much related to the green transformation of Europe, and on which we now want to work with citizens. So we already had in all member states a number of events where, as we were preparing these missions, we had citizens' assembly events where citizens discussed with us, gave us their feedback on whether these missions would really matter, whether they see those missions as important. But more interesting, they also came with their own solutions. And that, I think, is what I would want now to finish with. What I find so exciting in these missions is that they provide a place where they will be implemented not in Brussels. They will not be implemented only in Rome. They will be implemented across Italy, across the European Union, in cities, regions, at local level. And I think what we need to do is to ensure that in these missions, there is space for local solutions to be impactful for the purpose of the mission. So clean cities, there is not one formula. Clean cities need to be invented and implemented in the cities. And the same goes for most of the other missions as well. And what we are now trying to do is to devise the agenda, devise the actions, agree on the priorities with you. And that, we think, will make a big difference, because if you devise the agenda with us, you will then also implement the agenda with us, because the changes needed in these missions, the changes needed for a more resilient Europe, they don't come from political decisions, they don't come from technology, they come from society changing with these policy frameworks and that technology. So you need to pick it up. And I hope that with the missions, you will be part of the solution and therefore make a very big difference. That's what we're trying to do. I don't know if that makes sense. I'd be quite interested to hear your reaction. Thanks, Marco.
Thank you, Jean-Eric, for this short but comprehensive explanation about the mission. It's just a provocative moment we know very well. Nevertheless, this is just the beginning of a big adventure for us with this group of young, and we will report certainly to you. Now, we have some question, and there was one question that I would like to pass to you. You are in front of your WebEx screen. Oh, no, okay. You are already on top of the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, it's too far away from myself, but you can pick up the first at least. Please feel free to address the answer according to your feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Biljana, I think the presentation which I gave was really aimed at that question. And I think here again, I don't think there's one recipe, and we've seen it as we were. We have 5 missions. We must have had between 30 and 50 events with citizens in the last 3 months. Each of them was different. And in each of them, the purpose was really to find the way to explain what we were hoping to do. And that's always important to begin with. And then to create an environment, and you have different ways of having a participatory process, to have a real discussion with what often were large groups of citizens. In the tens and sometimes hundreds of people attended these meetings. But then what I found the most difficult and most important part of it was not just to organize it, not just to ensure that you could speak up and think collectively and come forward with your ideas. What I find the most challenging is firstly to listen and take it up on our side. But then, and that's then not so much for the event itself, but as we move forward, what is going to be very difficult is to be able to demonstrate more largely that we have listened, and that the implementation of the missions as we will move forward is fully informed and reflecting this interaction with citizens. Now I've lost the questions. I know them. Are you still all with me? Marco, are you still there?
Sure, I'm here.
Good, very good. So the second question was on gender. That's a good question too. And here the answer is that on gender in science and research, we made a lot of progress, but progress which is extremely fragile. A lot of progress because if you look at PhD, I mean, there are as many women as men. In fact, a bit more than men. Increasingly, you see that women are much attracted to science, and that is very, very, very positive. But then as you move up the system into principal investigators, into heads of research institutions or university tenure track professors, then the figures don't match, and women participation is lower and lower. And your question was on gender. I mean, I would probably broaden it even beyond just the gender question. It's an issue of better reflecting the diversity of society also in research and innovation. And there's a long way to go there as well. And I'm saying that this is very fragile because we've seen that now in the COVID crisis. In research institutions, also in our programs, Marie Skłodowska-Curie, mobility of researchers, we observe it very visibly. Those most impacted by the fact that we had to move from work in labs into the digital work in a much more constrained manner, the ones which suffered most were women, which often have other responsibility that's not specific to research. But we have seen more women not being able to sustain their research than was the case for men. So we need to be aware of that and be aware that all of that is really fragile. So what are we doing about it? I mean, there's lots which is happening, but let me focus on one aspect in particular. What is existing in many parts of Europe and in many institutions, many in Italy as well, universities or research organizations, is they have gender equality plans, which is a genuine effort, also an organization of the work to ensure that you move towards equality in a given organization. So ensuring that women have access to proper training, that when posts are being published, there is a particular effort to attract candidates, also ensuring work-life balance, which is useful for both genders, but particularly challenging for women often. So these gender equality plans exist in many member states and in many institutions, but not and by far across the board. So what we will now do is to say that if you want to be part of European programs, if you want money from Horizon Europe, well, you need a gender equality plan. If you don't have one, you're not eligible, no funding is available. Of course, we will give a bit of space for institutions to elaborate these gender equality plans so that they are also meaningful. But we would have, I think, the very large communities of organizations in Europe largely covered, I expect, by the end of next year. And we hope that with that we can continue to really improve the score on gender equality. We have a president of the Commission, Frau Ursula von der Leyen. It's a top priority for her. A Vice President, Margrethe Vestager, and Commissioner Maria Gabriel. They all want and will get gender equality, and I'm honored to help deliver that. Now on youth, this was the last question. This is a little bit outside my remit, but of course part of the broader portfolio of Commissioner Gabriel, notably on Erasmus. There will continue to be these programs, and we want, as you know, to make them even more inclusive because they are socially sometimes not completely inclusive. So there's a lot of effort in the preparation of the new wave of Erasmus for that. And that, of course, also applies to youth and culture, employment and youth. There are many programs across the EU. And I think they are obviously more important than ever. I mean, I have children myself. I have children from 14 to 26, 26, 23, 19, and 14. And so they are, all four of them, now at a moment where they will become fully part of society and need to build themselves a future. And this has never been easy. It's very obvious that in the present pandemic, this is going to be particularly difficult. The cost of dealing with the pandemic, there are real concerns which I share for younger generations, and I think it is our responsibility to ensure that you are part of the reconstruction of our societies, that you are really helping us, and in fact, ideally, that you would lead in building these more resilient, future-oriented societies. And many young people, not all, but many young people, want that around more inclusive, more generous policies, including, of course, green and climate relevant policies. And that, of course, is at the heart of the agenda of the Commission, and therefore highly relevant for young people, I hope, as well.
Thank you.
Now I don't have questions in front of me anymore.
No, because we have just picked up someone.
Yeah.
There is not too much time, and we are approaching the end of this speech. Just one comment from myself about the last questions. Do you believe that the fact to have one single commissioner in charge of R&I and youth will create some kind of bridge in the next future?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Much more than in the past.
Yes. I think describing what it means is much too bureaucratic, so I'm going to spare you from it. But Maria is absolutely keen, absolutely every day, to ensure that all her team, so colleagues in other parts of the Commission, my colleagues here, we really try to connect our efforts and work and really bring it together. And I think what you need, notably, is a real concept which bridges training, vocational training, education, higher education, and then, of course, knowledge and science. So not all young people will go into science, but I think many of you need to have the opportunity to choose to go into science. So you need much more continuity, largely a national responsibility, but there are many instruments, including support, which we can provide, and we need to have this framework to allow it. No, I mean, Maria is absolutely on it, I must say.
Okay, that's clear, and I fully agree. Your last comment. Maybe the future will be will propose a lot of interesting contamination between these two areas.
Exactly. So to young people still with us, thanks a lot to begin with, but then challenge us. The EU level is, I believe, highly relevant, but I don't want to give you the impression that the EU level knows and is right. I think we have a lot of history, a lot of evidence, a lot of analysis on which we base, I think, positive, powerful, future-oriented policies. But they can only work if you tell us where they are right or maybe not, and help us then find the right agenda to implement them. So you need to be part of that discussion with supporting, but also with being constructive and critical to help us and help everyone in policy making get it right. So be part of the policy making process. Be part of democracy, because you are shaping it. That's what I wanted to say to you. Mark, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much to you, Jean-Eric. We have appreciated a lot your contribution to this part of the session too. As far as concerned APRE, as usual, we will continue to do our business as usual with the community, with the R&I community, but that is normal fact. But what we are going to do in the future is try to start better relationships with these groups of young generation that is, even for us, a complex problem to deal with. So it will be our interest to inform you and to pass you our next steps. Thank you again.
Marco, arrivederci everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again. Now, just a few second stops, a couple of minutes, and we start again with the last session of the Today Conference. Non so perché lo stavo dicendo in inglese e mi sono sbagliato. 2 minuti e cominciamo con l'APRE Mag. Restate con noi. Grazie.